I'm a bit afraid of Pavlina, where she is. Oh yeah, because it cannot be both shortly and slowly. It will be shortly. Okay. So, at the beginning, I would like to point out that the text written on the occasion of this conference is not only a part of a broader project, and I'm referring to not only to Resonances project, which we started with all people mentioned already, but also to the fact that Piotr Piotrowski Center for Research on East Central European Art has recently inaugurated cooperation with Arsenal Gallery in Poznań in terms of substantive care of the net archive donated by Jarosław Kozłowski to the city of Poznań in 2022. The collection is in the custody of Poznań Arsenal Gallery, and in accordance with the will of its director, Professor Marek Wasilewski and Professor Jarosław Kozłowski, the substantive care of the collection will be provided by the center. On this occasion, the conference that was to be held as a part of the Resonances series in Poznań in March in 2023 will be dedicated to the formal inauguration of this cooperation, especially since, coincidentally, the last chapter of this project was to deal with the relationship of artists from East Central Europe with artists from the Global South anyway. For the sake of the larger number of such works in both Net Archive and the Artful Archive, sorry. No, doesn't really work. Okay. The conference entitled Equal and Pool, and I'd like to invite you to the conference and encourage you to also apply for the conference. A comparative perspective of art on art in Communist Europe and the Global South in the long 70s focuses on the types of cooperation between artists from Eastern Europe and the Global South in the late 60s. And throughout the 70s, which, as Piotrowski argued in his last book, was based on a different approach to both art and cooperation. In the case of Eastern Europe, it was informative, according to Piotrowski, but a formative attitude prevailed among artists of Global South. The conference will address recent Latin American theoretical approaches, such as Anna Longoni's theory of artistic activism applied to the art of 70s and to the East-South exchange networks developed primarily via mail art and experimental poetry practices. My goal is to exploit the common background of artists from both regions for an analysis that, instead of the traditional formal analysis, would reach for elements that would enable the shift towards what Piotrowski, echoing the text of Elkins and Ziemans, referred to as material analysis, and which remained only a postulate. For those who don't participate in the Resonances project, I would like to point out that my presentation today, necessarily truncated, is a continuation of what I presented in Budapest, and a slice of analysis in which I include works of Eastern European artists and artists from the Global South, such as Chilean artist Guillermo Diesler or Argentinian artist Horacio Zabala, which are in Net's collection. In my text, I would like here to focus on the very first exhibition at Accumulatory 2 Gallery run by Kozłowski to point out potential tropes and problems facing material analysis. The first exhibition Okay, and I would like to say also thank you for Clara Kempwelch for accepting our invitation to the conference as a keynote speaker. This is Horacio Zabala and Zsuzsa, that's what I meant. So the first exhibition realized in Accumulatory Gallery, in the organization of which, by the way, Piotrowski, who was a student of Kozłowski at the time, took part, was the exhibition through myself by Brazilian artist Angelo de Aquino. Piotrowski analyzed this exhibition in his last book, soon to be published in English under the title A Global Approach to the Art of Eastern Europe. It was a work that Piotrowski, who postulates a shift from formal analysis, nevertheless describes using language that is strongly implicated in it. Piotrowski subjects to analysis what he calls the exhibition's narrative and its symmetrical structure with two rectangles drawn on the floor, placed opposite each other, in which were inscribed respectively the sentences, I am Jarosław Kozłowski and I am Angelo de Aquino. As he argues, and I quote, the two artists functioned as if they were together in the gallery, but they did so incongruently. De Aquino designed the project and was present throughout his idea. Kozłowski realized the plan, and he was therefore present through his action. Yet, both of those roles were questions, thereby creating a broad interpretative field concerned with the notion of authorship and based on the questions who, in essence, is the author of the exhibition? Is it the artist? And who is the creator, the curator? Moreover, continues Piotrowski, the viewer experienced this ambivalence even more powerfully when encouraged by organizers. He or she stopped into the fields designated by the artist, by artist names, one of whom was the exhibition's curator. Curator. Without being able to identify with either one of them. Entering the field with the inscription, I am Jarosław Kozłowski or I am Angelo de Aquino, the viewer realized that he or she could not be either one or the other. Here Piotrowski gets caught up in the considerations that are anchored in the paradigm of individual work and related sees the roles individual work and relatedly sees the roles of artists and curators as binary. This binary and the paradoxes that art historians perceive as generated by the works of the Brazilian artists are easily abrogated by moving beyond the paradigm of individualism towards collective work. Moreover, even when reaching for the political context of the artist's work, Piotrowski explains the notion of violence that appears in the work by recalling Institutional Act No. 5, introduced in Brazil in 1968, the 4 years after the coup that ushered in the rule of military dictatorship. What Piotrowski fails to notice, however, is the coup, the 64, that led to the overthrow of the Brazilian president by members of the Brazilian armed forces supported by US government with the Operation Brother Sun, and the anti-communist purges that removed the left from the power for several decades. The proper context for Brazilian artists' work at the Accumulatore 2 gallery is the work he created 2 years earlier in Milan as a part of his book Illusions. And this is the work. It was in the form of a sheet of paper on which the following statements were written. All country is my country, all name is my name, all work is my work, I'm you and I'm me. The work can be read as a reference to the Communist Manifesto abrogating national belonging, proletarians have no homeland, or individualism in favor of an essentialized worker's identity. From such a perspective, Piotrowski's analysis of the authorship of thought, which are essentially tied to the individualist myth embedded in the tradition of formal analysis, miss the point. In an attempt to assign meaning to the inscriptions on the floor, Piotrowski convincingly argues that the rectangle with the inscription Tropical landscape Tropical landscape can be read as an allusion to Elio Otisika work Tropicalia from 1967, which became an icon of participatory work in Brazil. And yet also the largest central section of the Aquino work, which Piotrowski almost neglects to include in his interpretation, and I mean this part, the central part, gains readability in the context of Otisika work, namely one of the most famous works of the Brazilian artist, 1968 banner, Be an Outlaw, Be an Hero, which is here. For what escapes Piotrowski is ironically the possibility of projecting the body in a horizontal position into a space defined as being reserved precisely for the artist's body. In my opinion, Piotrowski here is again guided by his superstructural attachment, and I think, again, because I prove in my afterword to his last book that he also does it to socialist realism and pop art. So he's, again, guided by his superstructural attachment derived from the tradition of formal analysis. This is because he assumes that the field is intended for the artist, treating the term body as the metonymy rather than evocation of the matter of the body. This error has already appeared, however, in the translation of the Brazilian artist project into Polish, by arbitrarily replacing the word body with the word artist, which is done, I suppose, by Kozłowski. So only those people who understand Polish, they will understand that error. Okay, sorry. Reserved for the artist. My interpretation, insisting that this might be about a horizontal material body, not a vertical body, is legitimized not only by the reference to the famous banner, but also by what the banner alludes to. I'm obviously referring to the torture and so-called disappearances sanctioned by both the Brazilian military regime and Kubrak manuals, counterintelligence interrogation issued by CIA in July 1963. In this context, the black chair in the corner, which was designed by the Brazilian artist and placed by Kozłowski, would simply be allusion to interrogation. What is still worth mentioning in this context is the visitors to the exhibition, including Piotrowski himself, to whom Piotrowski attributed a status of that falls either within the binary possibilities or binary exclusions. This either or neither nor identity of participants does not make any sense. What would it contribute to our understanding of the work that visitors of the exhibition are neither Kozłowski nor the Aquino, or that they are entrapped in either or position? However, when we consider the collective identity of the creators of this work, we can see the drawing on the floor as a peculiar hopscotch. Individual identity is thus not only a lie, providing a starting point, ending inevitably with the dead body. The conclusion I'm obviously coming to is acknowledging this working identity of artists. What's more, I think the work can be interpreted as activating a similar identity in viewers. However, this thesis is a bit like self-fulfilling prophecy. At the same time, it's hardly risky because who in Poland in 1973 could say with certainty that she or he did not belong to proletariat? And also very risky, as on the other hand, who would really say that she or he belongs to one? Here we touch upon the problem of cognitariat, or the group defining itself at the time as intellectuals. I will not go into the extensive theoretical dictation on this subject. I would like just to point out that I disagree with Antonio Negri when he shifts his emphasis towards the dominance of cognitive and immaterial labor, makes it possible to eliminate the power of capital and thus liberate ourselves from the relationship of subordination. Rather, the notion of organic intellectuals characterized by Gramsci, who is a crucial link between Marxism and subaltern studies, as a function of a group that wages a struggle to assimilate and ideologically combat a group of traditional intellectuals, can be invoked as useful here. Although the primacy of the superstructure, that is the essence of the concept of hegemony, contributes in Gramsci's philosophy to the attribution of exceptional role of intellectuals and or artists, the philosopher is all the more cautious here, pointing out the illusory nature of the sense of independence or autonomy of intellectuals. He calls the acknowledgement of the innate nature of intellectual activities a grave error, pointing to the relevance of, I quote, the system of relations in which they have a place within the general complex of social relations. As he goes on to note, the proletariat is not characterized by its manual labor, but by the fact that it is performed under certain conditions and social relations. Contrary to Gramsci, Negri believes that the cognitariat has direct access to its means of production. Hence, it functions independently of capitalist ones, which in a nutshell is a bullshit. For example, let's look at the issue of the English language, which I want to see here as a means of production. Analyzing the work of Kozłowski, the Grammary, which incidentally, in the form of an art book, was sent by Kozłowski to Brazil as a part of the exchange, Christina Freile rightly notes that English, in which the book was written, being the conjugation of the verb to be, meant a sort of false identity for artists. Freire optimistically believes, however, that English could turn possible some kinds of communication but not identification. The internationalism expressed here, she continues, was not ideological, but had instrumental purpose. I would be much more skeptical on this point. However important it is that Freire's thesis sheds light on what Piotrowski calls the difference between the formative and informative functions of net. English in this context would stand as a means of production to prevent the transformation to prevent the transformative and of the informative function into the formative one. Let's go back to the visitors of the exhibition through myself. I'm referring specifically to the visitors of to Piotrowski and his colleague, Andrzej Jur, a figure important to functioning of Acumulatory 2. Let's go back to that point. I mean specifically, although we see them as students and some at least as future outstanding academics like Piotrowski, in Accumulatore they were simply a workforce. I purposely don't use the term labor force here because I believe the relationship between them and Kozłowski was far from the capitalist one. Where Piotrowski asks about authorship, however, I would like to shift the paradigm by asking about the division of labor within the net initiative and related relations of production. Today, I only point to the fact that the work of the Brazilian artist provokes these questions and that only acknowledging this fact makes possible the turn that Piotrowski advocated for. However, I intend to develop this research. To my surprise, Jarosław Kozłowski, who usually strongly emphasizes his attachment to the notion of autonomy of art and argued about it with Piotr even after his death, declared his willingness to cooperate when we talked about When we talked about how I see the center's role in what I'm laboriously defining here as materializing net, which is actually supposed to be tearing the net out of its superstructural attachments and conditionings. So for March, we are preparing together a talk manipulated by my Marxist inclinations, which not only try to create a new net framework, but also brings out details from Kozłowski's memory, which have been so far depreciated in art history. First of all, I'm going to sketch out the class geography of net. This is the subject of my interest for some time now, and I'd like to say that with Katerina Preda we are preparing a volume after the first forum of Piotr Piotrowski entitled Plural and Multiple Geographies of Contemporary Post-Communist Art, East Central European art, which is about also a class geography. This is what I developed in my text for Umeni volume, stating that the distance from Paris to Poznań was not equal to the distance from Poznań to Paris in the 70s. I would like to sum up by saying that what is important for the class geography is well illustrated by details, key ticket prices, salary amounts, class differences between those who issued passports and those who applied for them. These issues are not a part of the formal analysis. At most, they are stuck in the domain of the supplement or anecdote. I believe that they should be recorded and reevaluated as means of production of artworks. In his last book, which opens up with a call for peripheries to the word to unite, Piotrowski proves the core of his project of alter globalist art history lies in his attempt to determine the relationship between global art history and post-colonial studies, and the impact of the latter on the issue of East European artistic peripheries. Piotrowski rejects post-colonial criticism of Eurocentrism, opposing the notion identifying Europe with the historical experience of European colonization that he finds simplistic. He also maintains the path to globalism or art history of Eastern Europe really leads through Europe, not against it. It seems that Piotrowski's incoherent approach toward Marxism influences his argument to the extent he ignores Marxist criticism of post-colonial narrative, such as book Eurocentrist by Egyptian Marxist Samir Amin, published in English in 1989. That not only provides adequate answers to certain issues raised by Piotrowski, so for instance, peculiar situation on Eastern Europe and Scandinavia as well. Moreover, it approaches them from the number of different angles. He also ignores Walter's Mignolos, the colonial critique, which leads through a critique of modernist paradigms and episteme, and provides a very good guide to material analysis. So to sum up, because I have some more text here, I would like to say that Marxist perspective enables to perceive both notions of a center and periphery that Piotrowski uses as a mere reflection of class division. Center can be thus defined as a result of solidified accumulation of capital and periphery of exploitation. During the conference that we are going to have in March, I would like to focus on those issues to emphasize that identity that I call after Spivak, that I call the class geography or the solidarity between Global South and Eastern Europe. So I call it a critical condition critical condition or critical or strategical essentialism, because I treat the role of net guardian as an ethical obligation. I would like to equip the marital part of the archive with a kind of shield against such appropriation. This is what in March conference will serve, and I would like to invite you to the conference. I will be very happy to meet you in Poznań. Thank you so much, and sorry for prolonging the speech.
Thank you very much, Magda.